me, everyone. This is Los Trios Psychologists, three psychologists with a passion for their professions, for technology, for their colleagues and how to inform them about technology. To my right, Dr. Joe Mitchell. Hello, Joe.
Hello there, Les.
And you'll see underneath here is Joe's Twitter handle. This is the way you'll be able to contact Joe and myself. And to my right, allegedly, the renowned Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg.
Where did you get that from?
It was printed this week.
That I'm renowned?
Yes, there was.
Can't be good.
It was said renowned. The renowned Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg.
What's he renowned for?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't say he's renowned. So welcome to Michael. It's taken some effort to get the three of us together because we all lead three different psychological practices here in Melbourne, Australia. We are now sitting in, is it Abbotsford or Collingwood?
Abbotsford.
So this is Abbotsford, and we're at the Michael's place of work. Michael, where are we?
We're at the Young and Well Cooperative Research Centre, which is set up by the Federal Government Department of Innovation to explore the intersection between young people's mental health and technology.
Right, and that's essentially what we're going to be talking about a lot of the time in these podcasts, which will happen on an regular, irregular basis while we trial our way of doing things. And later on, in order for you to find out when our next podcast is, we'll tweet it out there. So you've got to actually follow us, and that's the way you'll find out. So the thing that bonds us, and not yet binds us, but bonds us, is a passion for using technologies in our practices to make them run better, but also to acknowledge that the world is changing with technology, and our patients, and our clients, and our consultees, our colleagues are actually walking into practices with these technologies in their pocket. Let's everyone hold up their devices of choice. That looks like Michael has an iPhone Plus, 6 Plus. I have an iPhone 6, and Joe has an iPhone 5 by the looks of it. So there we go, Plus, 6, and Michael's also holding up a
Fitbit charge
phone, and Joe has a traditional watch, and I haven't worn a watch for 10 years, except today. We are recording on April 10th, 2015, today at 5:01 p.m. Friday, which will be 12:01 a.m. in the United States Pacific time. One can go online and order the Apple Watch for delivery on April 24th in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
So I'm ordering, Michael's ordering, Joe is thinking he's going to wait to see ours.
I'm thinking about it. I'm actually interested in why I should, which you two will be great at telling me why you think.
Yes, so we're going to be the Apple Watch guinea pigs.
We could.
Yeah.
It's not because we're necessarily fanboys, but although we are, but I think it's more because we know that many of our clients will be using these.
Yes.
But also, if we're going to stay ahead of the curve, we actually have to understand what this technology means in regular daytime use. Do we encourage our patients to go out, or our clients to go out and get these things, or something similar to it? And what are we actually going to measure, and how do you integrate it into any sort of client change?
Well, for me, it's all about well-being. And I think that we have an obligation to make sure that all our clients, particularly my clients, young people, are adept at managing their well-being, because the research that we're doing here tells us they're not very good at doing that at the moment. So one of the reasons why I think the Apple Watch would help so much is it helps in terms of sleep, in terms of exercise, and of course mindfulness meditation, which I'm very big on.
Okay.
But then, okay, so my phone will do all of those things. Why do I need to go out and buy the watch?
I guess one of the reasons is that young people love technology and they love the latest thing.
Okay, so this is more of an engagement strategy.
I reckon this is an engagement strategy.
It's actually that it's adding.
And remember, this will link directly to their phone anyway. A lot of the really interesting dashboard data isn't displayed on the Apple Watch. It's actually displayed either on their screen or on their...
So it will record on the watch, and then for later review will be shared on the iPhone or whatever device, an iPhone or an iPod for that matter, not yet Android, and then that information can be transmitted via a cloud service, and you can have that information sitting on your desk or in your file before the patients even get there, and then you can go through it.
And what amuses me so much is that we've just celebrated the 5th birthday of the iPad.
Yeah.
And Les pointed out to me that when the iPad first came out, there were all these naysayers saying it'll never work, it's crap. It's been the fastest selling Apple device.
Any device.
Of any device.
Technology.
Right? I mean, it outsold the iPhone and the iPod. So, I mean, I'm just fascinated to see already we're getting the naysayers about the Apple Watch hasn't even come out yet.
Yeah.
Sure. And again, the point is, well, we've all got watches. What do we need this for? Because the idea is that because it's called a watch, that's all it does. It's a watch, but it's not. It just happens to be called a watch because it's familiar that we wear it on the wrist.
Yeah.
If we recall, when the iPad was released, and there was all this big build-up, as there often is, that Apple likes to encourage, people got a hold of it and said, you know what, it's using apps, it's just a big iPhone. Who needs it? And of course, for Apple, to hear people say it's just a big iPhone is music to their ears. Why? Because of transfer of training. You already know how to work an iPhone. You're going to have no difficulty working an iPad. But then comes the time for releasing apps that will take advantage of all that real estate that you can have on an iPad.
Yeah.
And now we've seen what's happened to it. It's been used to disrupt teaching and education, and all sorts of things where previous tablets kind of got siloed and failed. And that's probably going to happen with the watch as well.
It revolutionised the print media, probably saved magazines and newspapers.
Yeah, that you can now sit down. Like, I do so much of my work on my way to work, so on the tram, 45-minute journey from my iPad or from my phone. The things
I've just discovered the joy of taking a bus to work because you've got that downtime, but you can be completely absorbed in something, which is really fantastic. It's all on your iPad.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, Michael, this week you've been vocal on a number of situations which have brought you to the forefront of media again.
Made him renowned.
That's what made you renowned.
Okay.
You've been talking about alcohol on the AFL. You've also been talking about apps or a service where parents can control somewhat what their children see, or at least monitor it. So we're going to call it? So tell us a little bit about that first. And
okay,
then
so
we'll
this
about
is app, I don't even want to name it because I don't want anyone to use it, which basically is coming from the United States, which allows parents to monitor every single thing that their kid does, both on their phone and their tablet device. And for me, this is completely the wrong way around. We need to give kids the skills, the knowledge and the strategies to use these devices in a safe, smart, responsible way, not destroy trust, which is what I think this will do.
The question I have for you is, who's the we? Because the children of today are so far ahead of the curve of most of the adults, that is their parents. So who's this we going to be that trains the children or trains the parents? Who's the we?
We have the eSmart education system, which is in most states right across Australia. And this is a proven framework of education, which is Australian homegrown. It works very well. It's in over 200 schools right across Australia. And it's growing very fast, and I think this is the future, where we actually get teachers, schools to recognise that you haven't educated kids. If they walk out of the school for the very last time, they don't know how to keep themselves safe online. You haven't educated them.
That still doesn't help me understand how parents are going to keep up.
Because this is all part of the parent education program as well.
The parents come to the school to get educated?
They not only come to the school, but they also get sent a whole lot of information via email. So it's a very, very good system. Should be in every school. If you are listening and you're not an eSmart school, why?
Okay.
So I've got a question for you on it. Then couldn't it actually be seen as a training tool? So early on with younger kids, that if I have access to everything that they have, then it's all about the quality of the conversation that I'd have with my child, and maybe setting some rules up around when I might take a look.
It would depend upon your definition of child, because I think kids under 5 should have a dumb phone, not a smartphone.
Yep.
Okay, so the ACMA latest data tells us that 35% of 8 to 11-year-olds own their own smartphone. That's extraordinary to me. And you wonder, what are they downloading? What's the level of monitoring and supervision? Yeah. Look, I think most kids are pretty tech savvy. That's what our research shows. They actually aren't posting stuff online that's inappropriate. We hear about it when it happens, but in fact the vast majority are doing a great job in keeping themselves safe.
Okay, so we've perhaps underestimated children's ability to self-regulate in this domain in service of just yet another technological moral panic that comes along when a new device is released?
Absolutely. My friend Daniel Johnson constantly reminds me that in the 1890s there was a massive panic over this habit that young women had of novel reading, which was going to basically subvert,
she didn't wash the dishes, she didn't clean the house, she's totally addicted to reading. It's true.
Well, it's true. Think about Elvis Presley. You're probably too young for Elvis Presley, but
thank you.
You are. but when we had movies and the whole video game violence panic, there's not one shred of evidence that it increases violence, causes kids to see violence as a problem-solving device. To my mind, this is just more technophobia.
Okay, so I tend to disagree a little bit with you when you say there's no evidence. What I tend to say when people ask me is that for every piece of evidence pro that there's a connection between violence and aggression and game playing, I will show you another study that goes the other way and says that there's actually a positive to be gained from children playing games, even including violence. It's a one-for-one. It almost comes down party lines: Democrat, Republican, Labour, Liberal. It's like, and it's this confirmational bias.
Joe, tell me what you think of video games.
Well, obviously I'm going to be looking at that in a project with you and the Young and Well CRC over the next 3 years. So jury's still out for me, but obviously invested in it enough that we thought that this was going to be a good idea, that we could look at how we could use video games for well-being, and which comes back to the point that I guess I wanted to make, which is really that it's not the tool, it's the tradie. Nice. That idea of these things can be used for good or bad. They can have good or bad influences on us, but it's not about the object or the thing itself. It's us and how we relate to it and what we do with it.
Well, I'd love people to actually log on to the Young and Well website.
I'm going to bring it up now underneath so people can see what it is.
And particularly have a look at our report that was published by Associate Professor Daniel Johnson from QUT, which actually reviewed the literature that Les says he's read and knows so much about. And in fact, what you'll find is that moderate gameplay is associated with less depression, less anxiety, and that families that game together actually bond much more than families that don't. So I'd love people to have a look at the literature review that we've done and then make up your own mind.
Okay, that
and
sounds good.
One of the reasons why I guess we wanted to go down this path as well, so I'm putting my hat on as wellbeing manager at AFL Players Association, is that in some ways we really limit what's possible for the players. They don't do a lot of the things that their non-playing peers can do in terms of being experimental and being out there in the community and testing boundaries. They've got some very clear boundaries set for them. And so the more ways we can find for them to legitimately de-stress, to enhance their well-being, I think the better. And I think that that's where video gaming is a real opportunity. Mm-hmm. And, we just did a quick and dirty kind of check-in with the players about a year ago in terms of usage, and we've got about 70% of them that are playing games. Yeah, in fact, and I'll have to go back and check out the player's name, but one of them who's competes at a really high level in terms of, I think it's FIFA that he plays. Yes. Yeah. So it's quite common.
So since we're talking now about athletes attempting to perform at the elite level,
yes.
There was a report in this morning's press, and I'm just putting it up now on the webcast, of a young golfer playing at probably golf's premier event in the world, and that's the Augusta Masters, where they present you with is it the green or the gold jacket?
I think it's a green jacket.
It's a green jacket.
Augusta, yeah.
I mean, and this is the one is what Wimbledon is to tennis, Augusta is to golf. Would that be a good metaphor?
Indeed.
Yeah, that's a tradition. And he was talking about how he'd previously used various sports psychologists, but he's now finding that in the current method of bringing attention and focus to his game, he's now wearing a headband, which is an EEG measure. In other words, it's measuring various waveforms. And if you've ever been for a sleep test, for instance, you've spent overnight and hooked you all up, they're basically measuring EEG. But it's thousands of dollars. Now we're talking about a piece of equipment that sits like a headband around here. I have one. You've got one.
I do.
The ones that we have is called a Melon. I'm going to put a picture up for you now. I got involved with this on a Kickstarter project, so I got it early and cheap, probably the first in Australia. Michael's come a few weeks later, I think.
I'm actually a Muse and a Melon.
Okay,
I was Kickstarted with a Muse.
With a Muse. So that's the other one. We don't know which one this... What was his name again, the golfer?
Jason Day.
Jason Day.
Australia's premier golfer.
So he was saying that this particular headset, and it pairs up with either your mobile phone or with your iPad via Bluetooth, via personal networking via Bluetooth, and there are games that you play, and the games progress or don't progress depending on your status in terms of the EEG signals being read some of which are aligned with focus and attention, and some of which are more stress response and inattentive and unfocused and whatever else. So it's not a case of him being calm when he plays, it's a case of him being focused, and there's a difference. And it's one of the things I explain when I work with my anxiety patients, that we're not here to teach you to be calm when you go into your difficult situation, driving, public speaking, flying, whatever. The idea is for you to be focused, knowing what to do when confronted by a set of sensations or triggers out there, and it would seem that he's got onto it. The idea is to be focused and attentive. Does that? Let me ask you, Jo, because you're working with footballers. Football is quite different than golf in the sense with golf, it's very structured. You play, you do the stroke when it suits you, whereas with football, it's a moment-by-moment spontaneous thing. So it's not, unless you stop and you make a deliberate shot for goal, in which case it changes, like in basketball, and you're doing it at the penalty line. So tell us a bit about focus and attention, and whether this has a place, do you think, for footballers?
Okay, so first of all, let me just put a caveat in here that my role is not about the performance piece with the players, as in not their on-field performance. So what I'm interested in, what I work with, is their mental health and well-being and their performance off-field. So, however, I can absolutely see the applications with what we're doing off-field, and I think part of the problem from the psychology literature is this idea of the Yerkes-Dodson performance curve.
The arousal, that is, too little arousal, lousy performance. Too much arousal, lousy. There's a sweet spot, the Goldilocks point up here somewhere.
Yes, the critical point.
Where performance is at its peak.
Absolutely, and it turns out that there's, while it's a nice, easy, accessible kind of model, there's actually not a lot of research that supports it. And it also limits behaviour around performance to stress, as stress is the only motivator. And then you look at the work of people like Craig Hassard, and he looks at performance as being driven by focused attention in the present moment. I'd also add in that you need something like values to kind of pull you as well, rather than being driven by fear. But absolutely, we see this as really important, and that's why, for us, we have mindfulness-based workshops that we go through with the players, and that there's a number of clubs that also are doing their own programs and beginning to really develop stuff.
It's almost as if football clubs or any sporting club where physical prowess has been prized comes late to this idea of the brain. That you can train the brain. And they've struggled with this concept because it means if you have to train your brain, then you were weak in the first place. Which is a furphy we've got to help people get over.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of our biggest problems. And you will repeatedly hear discussions that happen post-game that talk about, our head wasn't in the game, or referring to some kind of mental skills capacity that wasn't there. And yet if you look at the resources that get put into that side of the sport, they're really minimal. And the other thing that is a bit of a bugbear that I have is this idea that if I get taught this once, I should then know it. So there's no reason for me to then repeat.
And practice.
Yet a technical skill, you might get introduced to it once, and then you practice and you practice and you practice and you practice. So that's where I think these wearable devices actually kind of, as an engagement tool and giving people an understanding that, well, maybe I need to practice this on a regular basis, and that there's something tangible here that I can see, and I know how to approach. Whereas, for a lot of people, just giving them mindfulness skills and, while there's some amazing apps like Smiling Mind and Headspace and Buddhify.
I'll bring them up on the screen now.
They're not enough. So I think that this is going to fill an engagement gap.
You feel the same way, Michael, that working with having patients coming in knowing that their psychologist or mental health worker is not just up to date with some of the literature, which as you'd expect, but with the actual practice of using this stuff and knowing how to integrate it, not having their practice centered only on technology, but the technology is an augmenting tool for your skills.
I think particularly for the young people that I work with, because I'm an adolescent psychologist, just enhances your credibility. The one caveat that I put on it is that you do actually, before you demonstrate it to them, need to know it inside and out. You can't be stuffing around with it because you just lose credibility.
That's right.
So to me, it's hours and hours of practice of every single app, every wearable device that I use, and I'm terribly excited about the fact that my muse has finally arrived from the United States. Les got it way ahead of me. But I was also very, very taken, the melon, I was very taken with the muse, and I think this is very much the future. If you think about it in terms of biofeedback for the brain, that's the best way you can think about it in terms of its utility.
So it's not the same as doing brain training that you know, all those Google ads that are popping up for companies like CogMed and Lumosity, and when people ask me about these things, I said, look, I've had a bit of a go at them, and I've certainly seen some of the research, and I've talked to my colleagues in clinical neuropsych who clearly have a much deeper knowledge of such things than I do. And as much as I am as technophilic as the next person, probably more so than the next person, in general, my little throwaway line is that what these games do in terms of brain training is get you really good at playing those games. But does it necessarily translate into everyday behaviour? Will your responses sharpen up when you're driving your car? Will you be able to pay more attention in a lecture? These are the sort of day-to-day practical things. Now, there's some talk about at least the working memory part, the part where you've got to hold on to someone's telephone number in your head. If you get really good at that, there's a little bit of talk about that being one of the things, if you get really good at that may help you with as a dementia prevention thing. But it's one of those things. If people say, well, what's the best thing for me to do in terms of keep my brain healthy? I usually say nutrition and exercise. That's got the most runs on the board.
And connect with people.
And connect with people.
Social interaction.
Yes, social interaction. Yes.
I do love that.
Yeah.
One of the greatest predictors of well-being in my client group is having a rich repertoire of friends, and I say that to them all the time.
And that's not just your cohort. When you look at the literature, I mean, the two strongest predictors of well-being are social connection, and if you look at that also conversely in terms of psychopathology and poor physical health outcomes, loneliness.
Interesting you should say that. I read this morning a story about one of the sharks who are on Shark Tank in the United States. We now have an Australian version, but there's a Canadian and an English version. I watched the American version. One of the guys is probably the most pleasant guy on the whole show. Is a guy called Robert Herjavec, who's always sits on the far right-hand side, or left as the camera would be, and he's involved with, he made his billions in computer security stuff. Seems the most pleasant sort of guy. Doesn't do the most deals though, compared to, say, Mark Cuban. Last year, he went through a divorce after 24 years of marriage, and he said he found himself in a hotel room at some point up on the high level and said, gee, it would be so easy just to jump off and just, because my kids aren't talking to me. My life is just fallen apart. This is a guy with millions, billions. He talked to his pastor at his church. He made a connection there and said, this is how I'm feeling. Somewhere along the way, the pastor invited him, so the story goes, to go to his homeless person's mission as a volunteer. And everyone thought he was a recovering drug addict, because that's what people do. He said, seeing other people going through what they're going through, put what I'm going through into such a change of perspective, but I'm also connected to them. And he said, I found joy working with them.
And there'll be a third element there as well, which again in the wellbeing literature comes out really strongly, which is giving, contributing to others. That's what makes a massive difference.
So and because he's got a bit of dough, he went down to Walmart and he spent $100,000 on socks.
How great would that be?
And just distributed them to the home. I can't remember what city it was in, but maybe in Cow, I don't know. So it's an interesting story that I picked up on this morning. So, okay, the guys with millions, billions, does it really protect you from the depths of despair sometimes?
Absolutely not. And Michael will know this really well, the relationship between income or money and well-being and health. You get fairly good bang for your buck when you're below the poverty line. But then the return that you get for more money, you don't get the same kind of growth in terms of enhancing your well-being. So I think, and I think that is fairly well established these days in popular media. It's not like we're still having to sort of push that point. However, we do still like to be super busy, and we still do like to accumulate.
And there's a wonderful website for people interested in the whole well-being area. It's called Action for Happiness, and it was put together by Lord Richard Layard, who's now Baron Layard. I love that stuff. I really would advise anyone watching this who's interested in the whole science of well-being, if you want to see a really user-friendly website with lots of fantastic downloadable free resources, Action for Happiness.
Yeah,
Excellent.
absolutely. And they also have great ways of giving you ideas for things that you can do in your own community. So, it's good for you as an individual, but also how you could maybe bring it into your community or your workplace or similar.
Okay. So, guys, we're going to wrap up now. We've covered a fair bit of territory in our short amount of time. It's gone quickly, and I've really enjoyed myself. The show notes will go up on the underneath the video when you see this. If there are things you want us to discuss, questions you have for us, you like us to respond to, probably the best thing to do is to tweet us rather than email, I think. And again, I'm going to put the Twitter handles. You can follow us anyway. Doesn't necessarily mean that we will respond to you directly by Twitter. There are some social media ethics we need to pay attention to here, and but we'll probably bring them up for conversation and answer them as best we can here and provide some links. Joe and Michael, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for organising it.
And we look forward to our next podcast. Bye, everyone.